Although professional philosophers will no doubt find fault with many of Smith's arguments, his critical attack should challenge our students and awaken them from their dogmatic slumbers. Okay. Here's some notes. And now we're going to look at another one. Review Atheism, the Case Against God, reviewed by Margaret, Placentra, Johnston. Atheism, the Case Against God is a reissue of a 1979 title by the same name. Author George H. Smith, can either be considered a forerunner of the new atheist writers so popular in the late 2000s, or as someone supplying a summary and capstone to the work. Readers should not let the decades that have passed since the original publication dissuade them from enlightening read. Smith wrote this book as an early 20-something. His polemical style is typical of a youth whose views are clear, somewhat strident and unmoderated by the paradoxes a person is likely to encounter over the course of a long and complex life. As a master of critical thought, he systematically describes and then flawlessly refutes just about every possible argument for the existence of God, cleanly outsmarting and out-reasoning any case a religious apologist could mount. Smith lists 3 requirements for a belief to claim the status of knowledge, and of course traditional religion fails all 3. He makes a particularly good point in stating that those who claim God is unknowable, yet insist they are certain he exists, are not entirely rational. To the extent that reason is a paramount means the truth, Smith's argument neatly destroys the concept of religious faith. His arguments are based on solid reasoning skills and difficult to dismiss, based as they are on a binary sort of logic, regard as a discrete being, separate from all of us, and not a part of the natural universe, must either be declared definitely to exist or not exist. But Smith's strongest contribution in this work is the clarity and finality of his arguments. Separating morality from religious belief, he cleanly refutes the conventional world stereotype of the atheist as an insensitive, immoral cynic. Irrational morality is based on standards or values. A religious morality is based on rules. It ought to be rules and standards and ethics. Religious morality may be described as a denaturalization of values. It divorces the pursuit of values from their natural consequences and relies on sanctions to motivate obedience. While one may not agree with Smith that abortion, drug use, prostitution and porn are victimless crimes, his assertion that in general Christian ethics totally fail to accomplish what an ethical system should have merit. Focused on guilt as it often is, Smith claims religion is profoundly anti-life, especially in terms of its psychological effects. While this may be indisputable with regard to certain forms of religion, Smith's citation of Ayn Rand for support of his premise is less than satisfactory. There is perhaps more valid justification among the proponents of positive psychology. The epilogue, added for this particular version, helps the wisdom and proper audience for the book fall into place. Today's 20 and 30 somethings grew up in a cultural war, battlefield of stark disputes between the conservative and progressive worldview. Their understanding of religion is undoubtedly stunted by overexposure to 2 growth-limiting conceptions. 1. The over-literalism of the fundamentalist mind, or the fundamentalists, and the progressive modernist rejection of all things spiritual in favour of absolute reliance on human reason and the findings of science. Smith's arguments offer a wonderful exercise in critical thought and challenge literal believers towards more comprehensive thought patterns. For example, on what basis can one believe the miracles of Christianity and yet deny the reported miracles of other religions? In the study of spiritual development, we learn that critical reflection on the truths we were brought up with and the resultant distancing from the teachings of our tribe, are healthy and a necessity. Important step on the road to a more integrated form of spiritual maturity. Smith provides all the logic anyone would need to make that first move beyond literal religious belief. The arguments he mounts are highly needed by certain segments of our society, young adults now at the perfect age to be critically analysing the truths handed on them by their tribe, and other adults who still have this necessary maturation task before them. Atheism, the case against God, is the perfect antidote to cure pre-critical minds of the spiritual myopia involved in literal and insular religious belief. Once Smith's arguments have been digested, however, one can only hope readers will remain open to other materials with the power to challenge them toward an even more comprehensive and more spiritual inclusive perspective. Margaret Placentra Johnston is a practicing optometrist and the author of Overcoming Spiritual Myopia, A View Toward Peace Among the Religions, September 2018, and Faith Beyond Belief, Stories of Good People Who Left Their Church Behind. So that's 2 reviews of Atheism, Case Against God by George H. Smith. Okay, here's a foreword by Lawrence M. Krauss. That's that. He's an atheist, but he's like really clever in his field. I remember seeing that guy. Haven't really listened to him much, but yeah, we definitely know he's very clever in his field. So we're going to go back to the book, Atheism, the Case Against God. We're going to have a little read of it. Contents. Continue. Introduction. Does a God exist? This question has undoubtedly been asked in one form or another since man has had the ability to communicate. Men have pondered the question, discussed it, argued it, and killed over it. It appears to be a simple question calling for a simple answer, but its simplicity is deceptive. Thousands of volumes have been written on the subject of a God, and the vast majority have answered the question with a resounding yes. You are about to read a minority viewpoint. This book is a presentation and defense of atheism. This is not a sympathetic examination or interpretation of religious doctrines. It is a straightforward critique, philosophically and psychologically, of the belief in a God, especially as manifested in Christianity. The subtitle, The Case Against God, has a twofold meaning. First, it refers to the philosophical case against the concept of God, and secondly, it refers to the psychological case against the belief in a God. As a philosopher, the writer or the author continually amazed by the credence given to religious claims in the intellectual community, and as a human being, he was appalled by the psychological damage caused by religious teachings, damage that often takes years to counteract. Atheism, even in today's liberal atmosphere, is still somewhat unacceptable. Simply being an atheist may be acceptable if, that is, one keeps it to oneself. What is frequently considered inappropriate is to advertise this fact, or openly to attack religious doctrines. Thus, some excellent critiques of theistic belief have been written by philosophers who, for reasons known best to themselves, refuse to acknowledge that what they are advocating is, in fact, atheism. And we also have the unfortunate spectacle of the philosopher who, after demolishing the idea of God philosophically, goes on to assure his audience with a gesture of glib modesty that he has merely presented his own opinion, and that he is not so presumptuous as to suggest that his listeners should abandon their belief in God. Finally, there is a philosopher or psychologist who, while openly admitting the irrationality of theistic belief, actually recommends it as a kind of therapeutic device designed to give emotional aid and comfort to mankind, thus lending support to the myths that the average man is emotionally incapable of facing facts. It is the writer's firm conviction, or was it writer's firm conviction, that man has nothing to gain, emotionally or otherwise, by adhering to a falsehood, regardless of how comfortable or sacred that falsehood may appear. Anyone who claims on the one hand that he is concerned with human welfare, and who demands on the other hand that man must suspend or renounce the use of his reason, is contradicting himself. There can be no knowledge of what is good for man apart from knowledge of reality and human nature, and there is no manner in which this knowledge can be acquired except through reason. To advocate irrationality is to advocate that which is destructive to human life. I'm going to read that again. Okay, this George H. Smith reckons it was his firm conviction that man has nothing to gain, emotionally or otherwise, by adhering to a falsehood or something that's not true, not real, regardless of how comfortable or sacred that falsehood may appear. Anyone who claims on the one hand that he is concerned with human welfare, and who demands on the other hand that man must suspend or renounce the use of his reason, is contradicting himself. I could probably agree with that. There can be no knowledge of what is good for man apart from knowledge of reality and human nature. Not too sure about that one. And there is no manner in which this knowledge can be acquired except through reason. To advocate irrationality is to advocate that which is destructive to human life. It is not the author's purpose to convert people to atheism. Such efforts are usually futile. It was his purpose, however, to demonstrate that the belief in God is irrational to the point of absurdity, and that this irrationality, when manifested in specific religions such as Christianity, is extremely harmful. In other words, he has attempted to remove the veneer of intellectual and moral respectability that often enshrouds the notion of a God. If a person wishes to continue believing in God, that is his prerogative, that he can no longer excuse his belief in the name of reason. But he can no longer excuse his belief from the name of reason and moral necessity. Although this book is intended primarily for laymen, or ordinary everyday Joes, it is impossible to avoid some degree of technicality due to the complexity of many religious doctrines. A writer cannot make an issue simpler than it really is. All he can do, and what this author has attempted to do, is to present the relevant issues as succinctly and clearly as possible, discussing them in terms of the fundamentals, while remaining fair to the various sides under consideration. It is also impossible within the scope of one book to consider every argument ever presented in favour of theistic belief, or to answer every objection that might be raised against atheism, so he has necessarily restricted this discussion to those issues which he considered most important. Didn't the people in the review say that he was arguing against everything, God-wise? Yeah. As a master of critical thought, George H. Smith systematically describes and then flawlessly refutes just about every possible argument for the existence of God, cleanly outsmarting and outreasoning any case a religious apologist could mount. Okay? So he's come up with everything. So no apologist, no religioso could beat him. Yeah, you get them every time. That's what it's saying there from this person's review, Margaret Placentra Johnston. That's what she's come to realise about this guy. Okay, this book is divided into 4 major parts. In part 1, the author discusses the nature of theism, atheism, and agnosticism, and he presents the insurmountable problems and contradictions entailed by the concept of God. In part 2, he discusses the nature of reason, demonstrating its incompatibility with faith and revelation. In part 3, he considers it the most significant attempts to demonstrate the existence of a supernatural being through an appeal to reason, showing how each alleged proof fails totally to make its case. In part 4, he discusses the harmful effects of religion in general, in Christianity in particular, upon morality and the attainment of man's happiness and well-being on earth. His approach to atheism is eclectic, in the sense that he draws from many different sources in defence of various positions. In no instance, however, should it be assumed that his use of source implies an agreement with the atheistic position by that source. Similarly, his use of an author in support of a particular position implies his agreement to that extent only, and in no case should further agreement be assumed. Also, it is necessary to mention that he employs the term God in 2 different ways. He uses it with a lowercase g, God, to refer to the generic idea of a God, for example, the general notion of a supernatural being, apart from any specific characteristics. He uses the term God with an uppercase G to refer specifically to the God of Christianity. along with its various attributes such as omnipotence, omniscience, and so forth. This unusual method provides him with a simple means of indicating in any given context whether he is referring to the idea of God in general or to the idea of the Christian God in particular. Finally, he wished to thank many people who aided in the preparation of this book, etc., etc. April 1973, Los Angeles. Part 1. Atheism and God. The writer has put the following work under your protection. No, this is someone else, Thomas Paine. I put the following work under your protection. It contains my opinion upon religion. You would do me the justice to remember that I have always strenuously supported the right of every man to his opinion, however different that opinion might be to mine. He who denies to another this right makes a slave of himself to his present opinion, because he precludes himself the right of changing it. The most formidable weapon against errors of every kind is reason. I have never used any other, and I trust I never shall. Thomas Paine, Age of Reason. The scope of atheism. 1. The myths of atheism. The fool says in his heart there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. That abominable means wicked or unrighteous. There is none that does good. It's talking about them. Okay. They who do abominable deeds, there is none that do good. This frequently quoted passage captures the essence of how the average religious person views atheism. Not really. Okay, maybe Christians do. Okay, maybe he's right in that way. Okay, this is how God views those who reject him, those who reject Christ, those who don't want to believe in him, etc., etc. That's what he's saying. That this fool says in his heart there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds, wicked deeds, sinful deeds, unrighteous deeds. There is none, in reference to these, that does any good. Atheism is probably the least popular and least understood philosophical position in America today. It is often approached with fear and mistrust, as if one were about to investigate a doctrine that advocates a wide assortment of evils, from immorality, pessimism, and communism to outright nihilism. Atheism is commonly considered to be a threat to the individual and society. It is science divorced from wisdom and fear of God, writes one philosopher, which the world has directly to thank for the worst evils of modern war. In there's one there, is that unless otherwise noted, all biblical quotations in this book are from the Revised Standard Version 1952. Yeah, that's that's the Roman Catholic scriptures translated into the Americanized modern English and put out into the world. That's one of them. It's not from the original manuscripts. A recent critique of atheism. Vincent P. Maselli claims that every form of atheism, even the initially well-intentioned constructs, shrinks and enslaves the individual atheist within and against himself, and eventually, as atheism reaches plague proportions among men, goes on to enslave and move society. It's probably some reference to some books in the index. Through similar representations of atheism as an evil, destructive force, religionists throughout history have prescribed various forms of punishment for atheists. Plato, in his construction of the ideal state, made impiety a crime, punishable by 5 years imprisonment for the first offence and death upon the second conviction. Jesus, who was offered as a paradigm of love and compassion, threatened that non-believers will be thrown into the furnace of fire, where men will weep and gnash their teeth, just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire. Matthew 13:40-42. Thomas Aquinas, the great medieval theologian, taught that the sin of unbelief is greater than any sin that occurs in the perversion of morals, and he recommended that the heretic be exterminated from the world by death after the third offence. So that's his opinion. That was his view, Thomas Aquinas. Okay. Just because they may have believed in God doesn't make them godly, right? They may be an actor, a pretender, a role player. those who have that appearance of being godly, but inwardly they're abominable, they're wicked as. Where are we? Okay, many states in America wouldn't allow an atheist to testify in court, and his Supreme Court of Tennessee in 1897 published this remarkable statement. Some questions here that he poses. The meaning of atheism. Theism is defined as a belief in a god or gods. The term theism is sometimes used to designate the belief in a particular kind of god, the personal god of monotheism, but as used throughout this book, theism signifies a belief in any god or number of gods. The prefix a, without, so the term atheism literally means without theism, or without belief in a god of gods. Atheism, therefore, is the absence of theistic belief. One who does not believe in the existence of a god or supernatural being is properly designated as an atheist. Okay, so yep, that's what we were doing. We were looking at these words and we were defining them, but we were told no, stop looking at the definitions. They go by the definitions, go by this particular book. But here, it's promoting the definitions from the Greek, as we did in our comments, right? Or in our video. Okay. Yeah, so atheism, without theism, or without or no theism, right? But here's the problem. The first atheists were Christians, as we put in our video. We read about it years and years ago, and then it came up in this video. We read it from this particular book, that the Romans, certain Romans called these Christians atheists because they wouldn't worship the goddesses or the gods, etc., that they worshipped. They even refused to worship the emperors. That suddenly came up with the idea that they were descendant of God or gods, all that sort of stuff. They wouldn't take part in the bull sacrifices, other pagan practices that the Romans were doing. At first, the emperors said, "Oh, just leave them alone. They're not really a problem. They're no problem." But somebody kept pushing. Oh yeah, but they should be doing what we're doing. Why aren't they doing it? Some Christians, to take the pressure off them, they actually did it. Did these practices, etc. But these other ones said, no, it's all pagan, we're not doing it. So eventually a decree was put out, and these Christians were persecuted, chucked in the arenas, etc. Hung up and used as candles, or not candles, torches, human torches, so people could see when they walked through the gardens and stuff like that. But in that day and age, they were called atheists. They were the first atheists, called that by the Romans. So how could they have been without God, right? They were without their gods, the Roman gods. Okay? They were saying no to the Roman gods, pagan gods. So that's what it would mean in that sense. Without gods. Okay? Atheism is sometimes defined as the belief that there is no God of any kind, or the claim that God cannot exist. While these are categories of atheism, they do not exhaust the meaning of atheism, and they are somewhat misleading with respect to the basic nature of atheism. Atheism in its basic form is not a belief, it is the absence of belief.